The sun glinted off polished yacht hulls as water sprayed through the air, not from ocean waves but deliberately aimed at an elderly fish seller's carefully arranged morning catch. The wealthy yacht owner laughed, champagne glass in hand, while onlookers at Crescent Marina turned away in embarrassment. None noticed the quiet man observing from the shadows of the pier, his famous face hidden beneath a worn baseball cap. By sunset, the balance of power at Crescent Marina would shift dramatically, teaching everyone that true worth isn't measured by the size of one's boat but by the depth of one's character. This is a story about how a single act of cruelty led to an unexpected intervention that would transform an entire community and prove that sometimes, justice arrives in the most unexpected forms. Nico Rivera had spent over 40 years selling fish at Crescent Marina. His weathered hands bore the marks of countless early mornings hauling nets and arranging fresh catches on beds of crushed ice. At 68, his back had begun to curve slightly, but his eyes remained sharp and kind. He had arrived in America from the Philippines as a young man with nothing but determination and the fishing skills passed down through generations of his family. Over decades, he had built a modest business that supported not only his wife Maria and their 3 children, but also helped fund college educations for all 6 grandchildren. Everyone at the marina knew Nico. From wealthy boat owners to the maintenance staff, they appreciated his unfailing courtesy and encyclopedic knowledge of local fish. His small wooden stall near the marina entrance had become an institution. Locals would stop by not just for the day's freshest catch but also for his weather predictions, which were often more accurate than the official forecasts. "The fish tell me what's coming," he would say with a gentle smile. His business survived on the loyalty of longtime customers and the quality of his product, allowing him to maintain the same modest lifestyle for decades. Maxwell Price represented everything Nico was not. At 42, he had made his fortune in hedge fund management and purchased the largest yacht in Crescent Marina just 6 months ago. The 120-foot Maximum Impact gleamed with chrome fittings and boasted every luxury imaginable. Maxwell had grown up in a middle-class family but had spent the past decade systematically erasing any trace of his humble beginnings. His carefully cultivated image included designer clothes, a practiced disdain for anything ordinary, and a rotating entourage of beautiful people who seemed to materialize whenever Maxwell opened a bottle of champagne. The marina staff had quickly learned to fear Maxwell's temper. He fired his personal captain twice in the first month for perceived slights. He tipped extravagantly when in a good mood but would loudly berate service workers for the slightest inconvenience. Other boat owners at the marina, many from old money families who had summered there for generations, watched Maxwell's behavior with quiet disapproval but said nothing to his face. His wealth commanded a reluctant deference, though none would admit they felt it. Between Nico's humble stall and Maxwell's gleaming yacht existed an entire ecosystem of marina life. There was Eliza Thornton, the 70-year-old harbormaster who ran Crescent Marina with military precision and knew the tide schedules by heart. Marcus and James, a retired couple who lived aboard their modest sailboat and volunteered to teach local underprivileged children how to sail. Sarah Jenkins, who had inherited her father's charter fishing business and struggled to be taken seriously in the male-dominated industry. They all formed a community bound by their love of the sea and respect for its rhythms. Crescent Marina itself had stood for over a century on this stretch of coastline. What began as a simple fishing port had evolved into a picturesque harbor that balanced commercial interests with natural beauty. The eastern section housed working fishing boats in Nico's stall, while the western end featured increasingly luxurious private yachts. The marina provided livelihoods for dozens of local families. Many feared that rising property values would eventually transform it into an exclusive playground for the wealthy, erasing its working-class roots entirely. This tension between old and new, between wealth and work, had existed at Crescent Marina long before Maxwell Price arrived. But his presence had somehow crystallized the unspoken divide. His yacht, towering over the other boats, seemed to cast both a literal and metaphorical shadow. While most wealthy boat owners demonstrated at least a performative respect for the marina's history and working-class elements, Maxwell made no such concessions. He spoke openly about wanting the fish smell removed from his marina and complained about the eyesore of commercial fishing boats. Despite occasional unpleasantness, Nico had maintained his dignity in place at the marina through changing times. He had weathered economic downturns, hurricanes, and the gradual gentrification of the surrounding area. His philosophy remained simple: treat everyone with respect, work hard, and remember that the sea doesn't care how much money you have. When the waves rise, everyone faces the same risks. This wisdom, earned through a lifetime on the water, was something money couldn't buy, a truth Maxwell Price had yet to learn. As the morning sun climbed higher over Crescent Marina, neither Nico arranging his fresh catch nor Maxwell preparing his yacht for a day of entertaining had any idea that by sunset, their understanding of value and respect would be fundamentally challenged. The quiet observer watching from the shadows would set in motion events that would force everyone at the marina to reconsider what truly matters when the artificial hierarchies of wealth are suddenly reordered. The Saturday morning that would change everything began like any other at Crescent Marina. Nico arrived before dawn, setting up his stall in the gentle glow of his battery-powered lamp. He arranged the day's catch with practiced precision. Red snapper nestled against plump shrimp, local flounder displayed prominently, and his specialty, the butter-soft yellowfin tuna he had personally selected from his cousin's fishing boat. The morning air carried that distinctive blend of salt, fish, and diesel that defined marina life, a scent Nico found as natural as breathing. By 9 a.m., the marina had come alive. Weekend sailors prepared their vessels for day trips, children ran along the boardwalk with ice cream cones, and Nico had already served a dozen regular customers. He was wrapping a large snapper in paper for Mrs. Henderson, a loyal patron for 20 years, when the distinct sound of Maxwell Price's yacht engines rumbled through the harbor. Maximum Impact was returning from its overnight mooring in deeper waters, where Maxwell claimed the view was superior. Unlike most large vessel owners who moved carefully through the marina, Maxwell seemed to delight in creating the largest wake possible. His approach sent smaller boats bobbing violently, causing coffee to spill and sailors to curse under their breath. Eliza Thornton, the harbormaster, had warned him twice about speed regulations, but Maxwell had simply paid the fines without changing his behavior. Today, Maxwell's yacht carried a full complement of guests, a mix of business associates and beautiful strangers he'd met at last night's charity gala in the city. They sprawled across the deck furniture in designer swimwear, mimosas in hand despite the early hour. Music thumped from the yacht's expensive sound system, drowning out the natural sounds of the marina and drawing irritated glances from families with young children. "Who wants to see something funny?" Maxwell's voice carried across the water as he navigated toward his private slip. His guests, already buzzed from champagne, perked up at the prospect of entertainment. Maxwell pointed toward Nico's stall. "See that old man selling fish? Watch this." Rather than slowing as he approached his designated berth, Maxwell deliberately angled the yacht closer to the boardwalk where Nico's stall stood. He increased speed slightly, creating a larger wake that sent waves slapping against the wooden pilings. Then, with a smirk to his audience, he activated the yacht's exterior cleaning system, a high-pressure array of water jets designed to rinse salt from the vessel's gleaming surfaces. The timing was deliberate. As the yacht passed Nico's stall, Maxwell adjusted the angle of the water jets. The powerful spray shot beyond the boat and across the 15-foot gap to the boardwalk. Water blasted across Nico's carefully arranged display, sending fish sliding off their ice beds and onto the wooden planks. The spray soaked Nico completely, his simple clothes clinging to his thin frame as water dripped from his gray hair. Mrs. Henderson gasped as she was caught in the spray. Other customers jumped back, but not quickly enough to avoid being splashed. Nico stood motionless for a moment, water streaming down his face, his morning's work scattered around his feet. From the yacht, laughter erupted as Maxwell's guests applauded the prank. "Sorry about that," Maxwell called out, his tone making it clear he was anything but sorry. "Guess you needed some extra water for those fish." His friends laughed harder as he expertly docked the massive vessel, dropping the engines to idle as though nothing unusual had happened. Nico said nothing. With quiet dignity, he began retrieving his fish from the boardwalk. Mrs. Henderson, despite her designer outfit now spotted with water, knelt to help him. A few other customers joined in, their expressions reflecting a mixture of sympathy and embarrassment at witnessing such casual cruelty. "Don't touch those," Maxwell called out as he stepped onto the dock. "They've been on the ground. Health hazard. Probably should shut this whole operation down, don't you think?" He turned to address this last comment to Eliza Thornton, who had appeared at the commotion. "Mr. Price, that was completely unacceptable," Eliza said, her voice steady but tight with anger. "The marina has rules about..." "About what?" "Cleaning my boat," Maxwell interrupted, straightening the cuffs of his linen shirt. "Send me the bill if there's a problem. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have guests to entertain." Several other boat owners had gathered, watching the scene unfold with expressions ranging from disgust to uncomfortable fascination. Sarah Jenkins, the charter boat captain, stepped forward. "That was deliberate, Maxwell, And you know it. Maxwell's face hardened momentarily before he forced a laugh. It was water, for God's sake. Not exactly a criminal offense. Besides, he lowered his voice but intentionally remained audible, maybe it'll wash away some of the smell. Throughout this exchange, Nico continued methodically salvaging what he could of his inventory. His weathered hands trembled slightly, the only visible sign of his distress. When he finally spoke, his voice was even, carrying no hint of the anger he must have felt. The fish that touched the ground, I will not sell. The others are still good. He looked directly at Maxwell for the first time. In my country, we believe that how a man treats those who cannot harm him shows his true character. A flicker of something, perhaps shame, crossed Maxwell's face before he dismissed it with a scoff. Well, we're not in your country, are we? He turned to his guests, who had gathered at the yacht's rail to watch the confrontation. Let's take this party inside. The atmosphere out here has taken a turn for the worse. As Maxwell led his entourage up the dock toward the yacht club's private lounge, phone cameras captured the aftermath. By noon, videos of the incident had begun circulating among Marina regulars and on local social media groups. Most focused on Nico's dignity in the face of humiliation rather than Maxwell's cruelty, a fact that would have infuriated Maxwell had he known. What none of the videos captured was the man sitting at a corner table of the Marina's modest cafe, baseball cap pulled low over his eyes, watching the entire scene unfold. As Nico, now in dry clothes brought by his wife, continued his business with characteristic calm, the observer paid for his coffee and walked slowly toward the harbor master's office, his decision made. Benjamin Reed had not intended to spend his rare day off witnessing an act of casual cruelty. After finishing a grueling 6-month film shoot, he had driven himself to Crescent Marina seeking the simplicity and authenticity he remembered from childhood visits with his grandfather. In Hollywood, he was known for blockbuster action films and a reputation for kindness that seemed almost anachronistic in the entertainment industry. Here, with his baseball cap pulled low and 3-day stubble obscuring his famous jawline, he was just another visitor enjoying a quiet coffee and the rhythmic sounds of boats rocking gently in their slips. His grandfather had been a commercial fisherman who occasionally docked at Crescent when Benjamin was a boy. They would spend weekends on the small fishing trawler, the older man teaching his grandson the value of hard work and respect for the sea. Those memories had shaped Benjamin's character far more than his subsequent fame and fortune. Despite now commanding $20 million per film, he lived relatively modestly and found the excesses of celebrity life increasingly hollow. His most recent project, an action thriller about a former assassin seeking redemption, had left him physically exhausted and spiritually drained. When Maxwell Price's yacht had entered the marina, Benjamin noticed it immediately, not for its impressive size but for the disruptive wake it created. He watched the incident with Nico unfold from his corner table at the Marina Cafe, his coffee cooling forgotten before him. The deliberate angle of the water jets, the laughter of the wealthy guests, the quiet dignity of the elderly fish seller, all of it registered in perfect clarity. Benjamin remained still, years of training allowing him to observe without drawing attention to himself. What struck him most was not Maxwell's behavior. Benjamin had encountered plenty of arrogant wealth in his career, but the reaction of the community. The way Mrs. Henderson knelt in her expensive clothes to help Nico retrieve his fish. The harbor master's immediate appearance and defense. The other boat owners' expressions of disapproval. In that moment, Benjamin saw something increasingly rare. A community with values that transcended economic division. As a child visiting the marina with his grandfather, Benjamin had been taught to respect everyone who worked there, from the wealthiest yacht owner to the humblest deckhand. The sea doesn't care about your bank account, his grandfather would say. When a storm hits, we all need each other. That lesson had served Benjamin well through his unlikely journey from a working-class background to international stardom. He had never forgotten that fame and fortune were largely matters of luck, not personal virtue. Watching Maxwell walk away from the scene he had created, Benjamin felt something stir within him that he hadn't experienced in years, a clarity of purpose unrelated to film scripts or character motivations. In his latest movie, his character had found redemption through a grand gesture that rebalanced the scales of justice. The critics had called it unrealistic. Yet sitting here, watching Nico quietly resume his work with wet clothes and damaged inventory, Benjamin wondered if art might imitate life rather than the reverse. He pulled out his phone and made a call to his financial manager, stepping away from the cafe to speak privately. Janice, I need information on Crescent Marina, ownership structure, market value, recent sales in the area. He listened briefly. Yes, I know it's Saturday. This is important. And Janice? Complete discretion on this one. He ended the call and returned to his observation point. The marina had already begun returning to its normal rhythm. Nico had salvaged what he could of his inventory and continued serving customers, who seemed to be making a point of stopping by his stall. Maxwell's yacht gleamed in its berth, music and laughter floating across the water from its upper deck. To any casual observer, the incident was over, its ripples already fading. But Benjamin saw deeper patterns. This wasn't just about one act of disrespect. It represented something fundamental about how wealth could corrode character and how communities could either resist or enable that corrosion. The marina stood at a crossroads, its traditional working-class elements increasingly pressured by luxury developments and wealthy weekenders who viewed the authentic elements of marine life as quaint at best, nuisances at worst. Benjamin found himself mentally calculating the cost of various interventions. He could simply give Nico money, enough to retire comfortably or relocate his business. He could anonymously pay for marina improvements that would benefit the working fishermen. He could make a public statement about the incident, using his celebrity to shine a light on class tensions in coastal communities. None of these options felt sufficient. They might ease symptoms but wouldn't address the underlying condition, the gradual erosion of respect between economic classes and the entitlement that extreme wealth often generated. Benjamin had seen enough of wealth's insularity to know that shame alone rarely created lasting change in people like Maxwell Price. As he watched Nico speaking with a young family buying fish for their dinner, Benjamin was struck by the older man's natural dignity. Despite the morning's humiliation, Nico maintained his gentle manner, even smiling as he explained to the children how to tell if a fish was truly fresh. That dignity deserved more than charity or temporary vindication. Benjamin's phone vibrated with incoming information from his financial team. He scanned it quickly, his expression remaining neutral even as the outlines of a plan began forming in his mind. Money alone might not solve the marina's deeper problems, but applied strategically, it could create the conditions for a different kind of community to emerge. Standing up from his table, Benjamin left a generous tip and walked slowly toward the harbormaster's office. His path took him past Nico's stall, where he paused to purchase a small package of shrimp. Their brief interaction revealed nothing of his intentions or identity, just another customer appreciating quality seafood. But as he continued down the dock, his resolve strengthened with each step. What Benjamin contemplated wasn't mere charity or even revenge. It was an intervention designed to rebalance a system that had tilted too far toward valuing wealth over character. The irony that he would use his own considerable fortune to achieve this wasn't lost on him. But perhaps that was fitting, using the master's tools to rebuild the master's house into something more equitable. By the time he reached the harbormaster's office, Benjamin had mentally committed a significant portion of his net worth to a plan that most of his financial advisors would consider insane. Yet he felt more alive, more purposeful than he had in years of playing heroes on screen. The difference was stark. In films, justice came through scripted action sequences and carefully crafted dialogue. Here, it would require something far more complex, a recalibration of values that money alone couldn't achieve. As he opened the door to Eliza Thornton's office, Benjamin removed his baseball cap, revealing his identity for the first time that day. The harbormaster's momentary shock quickly gave way to professional composure, but her curiosity was evident. "Mr. Reed," she said, extending her hand. "What brings you to Crescent Marina?" Benjamin's answer was simple but laden with purpose. "I'd like to discuss the future of this place, if you have some time." He closed the door behind him, leaving the sounds of the marina, Maxwell's distant music, children's laughter, the call of seagulls, temporarily outside. The next stage of his plan was about to begin. The meeting between Benjamin Reed and Eliza Thornton lasted nearly 2 hours. As harbor master for the past 15 years, Eliza possessed comprehensive knowledge of Crescent Marina's operations, finances, and politics. She explained that while the marina remained profitable, development pressures had increased dramatically in recent years. The current ownership, a family trust established by the original founders, had been fielding increasingly generous offers from corporate entities specializing in luxury marina conversions. "They've resisted so far," Eliza explained, spreading maps across her cluttered desk. "The Whitaker family has deep roots here. But the younger generation is less connected to this place, and the tax burden increases every year." She traced her finger along the eastern section where the working fishing boats docked. "This area operates on razor-thin margins. One major storm, one bad season, and the financial calculus changes completely. Benjamin listened carefully, asking pointed questions about ownership structures, zoning regulations, and the economic interdependencies of the various marina businesses. His comprehension surprised Eliza. Celebrities weren't typically versed in maritime commerce and property law. What she didn't know was that Benjamin had grown up watching his grandfather struggle against similar economic forces in another coastal community, one that had eventually succumbed to luxury development. "What can you tell me about Nico Rivera?" Benjamin asked, steering the conversation toward the morning's incident. Eliza's expression softened. "Nico's the heart of this place. Arrived here in '79 with nothing but fishing skills and work ethic. Started selling from a cooler on the dock, built up to the stall you see today. His wife Maria worked 3 jobs to help get their kids through school." She paused. "They've had opportunities to sell out, open a fancy seafood restaurant catering to tourists. Turned them all down. Nico says he's a fishmonger, not a businessman." "And Maxwell Price?" Benjamin kept his tone neutral. Eliza's face tightened. 6 months here and already causing problems. Bought the slip from the Johnsons, lovely family, had that berth for 30 years. Maxwell paid triple market value, made it impossible for them to refuse." She sighed. "He treats the place like his personal playground. This morning wasn't the first incident, just the most public." Over the next hour, Benjamin outlined his emerging plan. He would use a private holding company to make an offer for the entire marina, significantly above market value but contingent on specific conditions. The current ownership structure would be converted to a community trust with governance shared between commercial and recreational users. Long-term leases would be guaranteed for the working fishermen and businesses like Nico's, with capped rate increases to prevent economic displacement. "It's unprecedented," Eliza said, looking both skeptical and hopeful. "The Whitakers might go for it, especially with the legacy protections you're suggesting. But what's your interest in all this, Mr. Reed? This isn't exactly a profit-generating investment." Benjamin smiled. "Not all investments are measured in dollars, Ms. Thornton." He explained his childhood connection to the marina and his grandfather's influence. "Places like this are disappearing all along the coast. Once they're gone, you can't rebuild them, not the buildings, but the knowledge, the relationships, the way different socio-economic groups coexist in functional community." He paused. "Consider it a heritage conservation project." Eliza seemed satisfied with this explanation, though she suspected there was more to Benjamin's sudden interest than nostalgia. They agreed that she would arrange a discreet meeting with the Whitaker family trustees, presenting Benjamin's offer without revealing his identity initially. The conversation then turned to more immediate concerns, specifically, Maxwell Price. "What he did to Nico deserves consequences," Eliza said firmly. "But marina regulations only allow me to issue warnings and minor fines for wake violations. Nothing that would register as more than a rounding error to someone like Price." "Leave Mr. Price to me," Benjamin replied, his voice calm but resolute. "But I'll need information, who he does business with, what he cares about, his schedule for the next few days." As they wrapped up their meeting, Benjamin made one unusual request. "I'd like to meet Nico, but not as Benjamin Reed." "Not yet. Can you arrange a casual introduction? Perhaps as someone interested in the commercial fishing side of the marina?" After leaving Eliza's office, Benjamin spent the afternoon conducting his own research. He walked the full length of the marina, noting the mix of vessels, from working lobster boats to weekend sailboats to luxury yachts. He observed the interactions between different groups, the unspoken hierarchies, the flow of money and services. And throughout the day, he gathered information about Maxwell Price. He learned that Maxwell had made his fortune through aggressive hedge fund strategies, often profiting from the financial distress of others. Despite his displays of wealth, industry insiders considered him a second-tier player desperately seeking entree into more exclusive financial circles. His yacht, extravagant parties, and marina behavior were all part of a carefully constructed image designed to project success and belonging. Most revealing was what Benjamin discovered through a carefully worded call to an old friend in the finance world. Maxwell's firm was courting a significant investment from Westlake Capital, a notoriously conservative fund known for scrutinizing both the business acumen and personal character of potential partners. The final decision on this investment would be made within the week, potentially doubling Maxwell's assets under management, or dealing his professional reputation a significant blow. As evening approached, Benjamin made his way to Nico's stall as the fishmonger was preparing to close for the day. Eliza had made the introduction earlier, presenting Benjamin simply as Ben, an investor interested in traditional maritime businesses. Nico welcomed the conversation, sharing stories of his decades at the marina while expertly cleaning the day's unsold fish for his personal use. "Nothing is wasted," Nico explained, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. "What doesn't sell becomes dinner for my family or neighbors. What they don't eat becomes bait for tomorrow's catch. The sea provides if we respect its gifts." Benjamin asked thoughtful questions about the economics of small-scale fish selling, the challenges of competing with supermarkets, the relationships between fishermen and vendors. Throughout their conversation, he was struck by Nico's fundamental contentment despite obvious financial constraints. Here was a man who had defined success on his own terms. "This morning," Benjamin ventured carefully, "I saw what happened with a yacht owner. That must have been difficult." Nico's hands paused briefly before resuming their rhythmic work. "Such things happen. Some people, when they acquire money, think it makes them better than others. But money is like seawater, essential to have enough, poisonous to drink." He smiled slightly. "That man, he is drinking it by the gallon. Aren't you angry?" Benjamin pressed gently. "Anger is a luxury for those with energy to spare," Nico replied. "I have fish to sell, grandchildren to help educate. What would anger accomplish?" He wrapped a final package of fish and handed it to Benjamin. "No charge for listening to an old man's philosophy." Benjamin accepted the gift with genuine gratitude. As he walked away from Nico's stall, his resolve strengthened. This wasn't just about punishing Maxwell's arrogance or preserving a picturesque marina. It was about recognizing and protecting a way of life that valued character over currency, relationship over status. That evening, Benjamin made a series of calls from his hotel room overlooking the harbor. To his attorney, authorizing the creation of a special-purpose entity for the marina acquisition. To his wealth manager, arranging the transfer of funds. To a publicist friend, discussing how to handle the inevitable media attention once his involvement became public. The final call was to the chairman of Westlake Capital, an older gentleman Benjamin had met at a charity function years earlier. Their conversation was brief but consequential, centered around hypothetical questions of character assessment in investment decisions. No names were mentioned, no specific deals referenced. Yet when Benjamin hung up, he knew he had planted a seed that could significantly impact Maxwell Price's future. As night fell over Crescent Marina, Benjamin stood at his hotel window watching the lights of the boats reflecting on the dark water. Maxwell's yacht blazed with illumination, the sounds of another party drifting across the harbor. In less than 24 hours, Benjamin had committed to spending more than $60 million and potentially disrupting his carefully constructed privacy to address an injustice against a man he'd just met. The decision should have felt impulsive, even reckless. Instead, it carried a sense of inevitability, as though he were finally acting in accordance with values his grandfather had instilled long ago. Tomorrow would bring the confrontation with Maxwell, the moment when private planning would transform into public action. Benjamin felt oddly calm about what was to come. The last pieces of his plan fell into place as he made notes for the morning: a reservation at the exclusive Marina restaurant where Maxwell took breakfast on weekends, a carefully worded text to Eliza Thornton confirming the Whitakers' interest in his offer, an email to his assistant canceling his meetings for the coming week. The stage was set for an intervention that would reshape the dynamics of Crescent Marina forever. Benjamin closed the curtains on the sight of Maxwell's illuminated yacht. Tomorrow, the real performance would begin, one without cameras, scripts, or second takes. For the first time in years, Benjamin would be playing himself rather than a character, addressing real injustice rather than the carefully choreographed conflicts of Hollywood. The thought brought both apprehension and a surprising sense of liberation. Sunday morning at Crescent Marina dawned clear and calm. The weekend crowds had not yet arrived, leaving the boardwalks peaceful as early risers enjoyed the first light. At precisely 8:30 a.m., Benjamin Reed entered the captain's table, the marina's upscale restaurant that served as the unofficial gathering place for the wealthier boat owners. He had exchanged his casual attire from the previous day for a simple but expertly tailored suit, nothing flashy, but unmistakably expensive to the discerning eye. The maitre d' recognized Benjamin immediately despite his attempt at maintaining a low profile. With a discreet professionalism born of serving celebrity clientele at various establishments, He led Benjamin to a corner table with an excellent view of both the dining room and the marina beyond. "Mr. Price typically arrives at 9, sir," he murmured while presenting the menu. "He always takes the center table by the windows." Benjamin thanked him with a generous tip and settled in to wait, ordering only coffee for the moment. The restaurant gradually filled with the weekend crowd, visiting boat owners, wealthy tourists, and a few locals splurging on a special occasion breakfast. At 9:03, Maxwell Price made his entrance, accompanied by two attractive women and a man Benjamin recognized as a minor tech executive. They were seated with the deference Maxwell clearly expected, commanding the prime table with its panoramic view of the water. For 30 minutes, Benjamin observed Maxwell's behavior, the performative wine selection despite the early hour, the loud comments ensuring nearby tables could overhear mentions of his recent business success, the casual dismissal of staff who failed to anticipate his needs quickly enough. It was the behavior of someone who believed money entitled him to both attention and immunity from ordinary social constraints. At 9:45 a.m., when Maxwell's party was midway through their meal, Benjamin nodded to the maitre d'. The carefully orchestrated moment had arrived. Benjamin stood and walked directly to Maxwell's table, his movement drawing eyes throughout the restaurant. Despite his deliberate attempt to dress inconspicuously, something in his bearing, the confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin rather than a purchased persona, caused conversations to pause as he passed. "Mr. Price," Benjamin said, stopping beside Maxwell's table, "I believe we have business to discuss." Maxwell looked up, irritation crossing his face at the interruption. He took in Benjamin's appearance with a practiced assessment of wealth and importance, clearly finding him worthy of at least momentary attention. "Do I know you?" His tone suggested this was highly unlikely. "No," Benjamin replied calmly. "But I know you. Particularly your behavior yesterday toward an elderly fishmonger named Nico Rivera." The restaurant had grown notably quieter, surrounding patrons sensing the drama unfolding. Maxwell's companions shifted uncomfortably, but Maxwell himself merely raised an eyebrow. "Are you his lawyer? Because spraying a little water hardly constitutes actionable damage." "I'm not a lawyer," Benjamin said. "I'm someone who believes that how we treat others, especially those we perceive as having less power, reveals our true character." Maxwell's expression hardened. "Listen, whoever you are, I'm trying to enjoy breakfast with my guests. If you have a point, make it quickly. Otherwise—" "My point," Benjamin interrupted with calm authority, "is that yesterday you demonstrated a profound lack of respect for a man who has worked honestly at this marina for more years than you've been alive. You used your wealth as a weapon to humiliate someone who couldn't fight back. And I find that troubling, not just personally, but as a potential business concern." At the mention of business, Maxwell's demeanor shifted subtly. He straightened, reassessing Benjamin with greater attention. "Business concern? Who exactly are you representing?" Benjamin allowed himself a small smile. "Currently, I represent myself. But as of tomorrow morning, I'll represent the ownership interests of Crescent Marina in its entirety." A murmur rippled through the restaurant. Maxwell's male companion leaned forward. "Wait, are you saying you're buying the marina?" "The whole thing." "The paperwork will be finalized tomorrow," Benjamin confirmed. "The Whitaker family has accepted my offer, contingent on specific terms regarding the preservation of the marina's character and existing businesses." Maxwell's laugh held a note of disbelief. "So that's what this is? Some rich guy playing white knight? Trust me, whatever you're paying, I can double it. I've had my eye on this place for development potential." "I'm aware of your interest," Benjamin cut in, "as I am of your pending deal with Westlake Capital. The investment that would essentially legitimize your fund among the institutional players you've been courting." The color drained slightly from Maxwell's face. His guests exchanged glances, sensing the conversation had moved beyond social confrontation into something more consequential. "How do you know about Westlake?" Maxwell asked, his voice lower, the performative aspect of his personality momentarily stripped away. "The financial world is smaller than it appears," Benjamin replied. "And character assessments matter more than you might think. Thomas Westlake is particularly old-fashioned about such things." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Maxwell's face. Someone at a nearby table had begun filming discreetly with a phone. Benjamin was aware of this but continued, his voice measured and calm. "Here's what's going to happen, Mr. Price. I'm purchasing Crescent Marina to preserve its character and community, not to maximize return on investment. Under the new ownership structure, slip leases will have a character clause. Essentially, repeated disrespect toward other Marina users becomes grounds for termination. Maxwell had recovered enough to affect disdain. You can't be serious. That would never stand up legally. My attorneys assure me it will, Benjamin replied. Particularly given your documented behavior. But that's not really the point. The point is that wealth without respect is simply power without purpose. And this community deserves better. The woman to Maxwell's right suddenly gasped, her eyes widening as she stared at Benjamin. Oh my God, she said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. You're Benjamin Reed. The restaurant erupted in whispers as recognition spread. Benjamin had known this moment was inevitable, but still felt the familiar discomfort of having his carefully guarded privacy pierced. He nodded slightly in acknowledgement but kept his focus on Maxwell, whose expression had transformed completely. The actor, Maxwell said, comprehension dawning. The Benjamin Reed? Does that matter? Benjamin asked quietly. Does my recognizability somehow make my points more or less valid than if I were anyone else concerned about basic human dignity? Maxwell was already recalculating, his mind visibly shifting from confrontation to potential advantage. Not at all, he said, his tone suddenly collegial. In fact, I'm a huge fan. Your last film was brilliant. Perhaps we've gotten off on the wrong foot here. Why don't you join us? We can discuss your plans for the marina. I have some ideas that might align with your preservation interests. The naked opportunism of Maxwell's pivot was almost breathtaking in its transparency. Benjamin remained standing, declining the invitation with a small shake of his head. My interest isn't in making deals, Mr. Price. It's in ensuring that people like Nico Rivera can continue their work without harassment or humiliation. The fish seller? Maxwell scoffed before catching himself. I mean, of course, that was unfortunate. A misunderstanding. I'd be happy to apologize if that would help smooth things over. His gaze darted around the restaurant, noting how many people were now openly watching and recording. Perhaps we could even create some kind of fund for the commercial fishermen. Great PR for both of us. That's exactly the problem, Benjamin said, his voice carrying in the hushed restaurant. You see this as a PR issue to be managed rather than a human interaction that requires genuine remorse and changed behavior. Maxwell's companion, the tech executive, attempted to intervene. Maybe we should continue this conversation privately. I'm sure we can find a mutually beneficial. There's nothing more to discuss privately, Benjamin interrupted gently. My decision is made. The marina purchase is proceeding. And Mr. Price, you should know that your slip lease will not be renewed when it expires next month. The restaurant fell completely silent. Maxwell's face flushed with anger. You can't do that. Do you have any idea who I am? Who I know? I know exactly who you are, Benjamin replied. That's why I'm doing this. He turned to leave, then paused. One more thing. I've arranged for Nico Rivera to receive a 10-year lease on his stall at $1 per year, funded by an endowment specifically created for that purpose. He won't need to worry about rising rents or development pressure. His place here is secure. As Benjamin walked away, Maxwell called after him, loud enough for everyone to hear. This is about publicity, isn't it? The caring celebrities standing up for the little guy. What a convenient narrative. Benjamin stopped and turned back. No, Mr. Price. This is about values my grandfather taught me long before I became famous. About respecting people regardless of their economic status. About using whatever resources or influence you have to protect what matters. He paused. And what matters isn't the size of your boat or the exclusivity of your social circle. It's the quality of your character and your contributions to community. With that, Benjamin nodded politely to the other patrons and exited the restaurant. Outside, the morning sun had fully risen over Crescent Marina, illuminating boats of all sizes and purposes in the same golden light. Benjamin walked slowly down the main dock, aware that what had just transpired would soon spread throughout the marina and beyond. As he passed Nico's stall, now being set up for the day's business, he nodded politely but didn't stop. The time for their proper introduction would come later, after the legal details were finalized. For now, It was enough to know that his intervention had set in motion changes that would preserve not just Nico's livelihood but the entire ecosystem of the marina. The delicate balance of working boats and luxury craft, of generational knowledge and new capital, of diverse people united by their connection to the sea. Behind him, Benjamin could hear the buzz of conversation flowing out of the captain's table as diners rushed to share what they had witnessed. He smiled slightly, knowing that by sunset, the balance of power at Crescent Marina would have shifted irrevocably. Not through violence or even legal maneuvering, but through the simple assertion that wealth did not confer the right to disrespect others. It was a message Maxwell Price, and everyone who had witnessed this morning's confrontation, would not soon forget. The events of Monday morning unfolded with the precision of a well-orchestrated film scene. At 9 a.m., Benjamin Reed's attorneys met with the Whitaker family trustees at a law office overlooking Crescent Marina. By 10:30 a.m., signatures had been exchanged, funds transferred, and Crescent Marina had officially changed ownership for the first time in its century-long history. The purchase price, $72 million, nearly 20% above market value, reflected not just the property's worth but the specific conditions Benjamin had insisted upon. The ownership structure created was unlike anything previously seen in marina management. A non-profit community trust would hold the property in perpetuity, with governance divided between representatives of the commercial fishing interests, recreational boaters, and local conservation groups. The trust's charter explicitly prohibited development that would displace existing businesses or alter the marina's essential character. Most importantly, it established subsidized lease rates for working fishing vessels and related businesses like Nico's fish stall. By noon, word of the purchase had spread throughout the marina community. Eliza Thornton, retained as harbor master with an expanded role in trust governance, called an all-hands meeting at the marina's central pavilion. Despite the short notice, nearly everyone connected to the marina attended. Commercial fishermen still in their work clothes, recreational boaters who happened to be visiting their vessels, shop owners, maintenance staff, and curious locals drawn by the buzz of activity. Benjamin stood slightly off to the side as Eliza explained the ownership transition and introduced the basic framework of the trust. He had deliberately downplayed his own role, instructing Eliza to focus on the community preservation aspects rather than his personal involvement. Nevertheless, his presence caused a constant ripple of whispers and smartphone photos through the crowd. The trust will ensure that Crescent Marina remains what it has always been, a working harbor that balances commerce, recreation, and conservation, Eliza explained. Slip fees for commercial fishing vessels will be capped at current rates plus inflation adjustment. Small businesses directly supporting maritime activities will receive similar protections. A hand rose from the commercial fishing section. What about the luxury yachts? They paying the same rates? Eliza glanced at Benjamin, who nodded slightly. The recreational vessel rate structure will be revised based on size and environmental impact. Essentially, the larger vessels will subsidize the working boats through higher fees. But those fees will still remain competitive with other regional marinas. This announcement produced a murmur of approval from the fishing community and thoughtful nods from many of the recreational boaters. The exceptions were clustered around Maxwell Price, who stood with arms crossed, his expression oscillating between disbelief and calculation. Additionally, Eliza continued, the trust charter includes a community standards clause. Put simply, repeated disrespect or harassment of other marina users becomes grounds for lease termination, regardless of vessel size or fee payment. All eyes turned to Maxwell, whose face reddened. Someone in the crowd coughed, "Karma," just loudly enough to provoke scattered laughter. Maxwell stepped forward. "This is clearly targeted discrimination," he said loudly. "You can't legally enforce respect as a lease condition. My attorneys will." "Your attorneys have already received a copy of the new lease terms," Benjamin interrupted calmly, speaking for the first time. "They're entirely legal and enforceable. And they apply equally to everyone, from the smallest fishing boat to the largest yacht." "This is about yesterday, isn't it?" Maxwell demanded. "One minor incident, and you leverage your celebrity status to take over an entire marina? That seems like a disproportionate response." Nico Rivera, who had been listening quietly among the fishing community, surprised everyone by stepping forward. His soft voice somehow carried across the pavilion. "Mr. Price, this was not the first time. 3 weeks ago, you complained to the harbor master that my stall lowered property values. 2 weeks ago, you told your guests, loudly, so I would hear, that the fish smell should be eliminated from your marina. Last week, You had your crew throw away my signs advertising the day's catch, claiming they violated aesthetic standards. Others began to speak up. The fuel dock attendant Maxwell had berated for being too slow, the maintenance worker he tried to have fired for dripping water on his deck shoes, the neighboring boat owner whose children Maxwell had yelled at for making noise during his party. The steady accumulation of stories painted a picture not of one bad day, but of a pattern of behavior rooted in a profound disrespect for anyone Maxwell deemed beneath his station. As the testimonials continued, Maxwell's companions began edging away from him, physically distancing themselves from his increasingly isolated position. Benjamin observed this with a neutral expression, allowing the community itself to render judgment rather than imposing his own. When the voices finally quieted, Benjamin stepped to the center of the pavilion. "Mr. Price, no one is saying you can't keep your boat here. The new lease simply requires the same basic courtesy and respect that everyone else in this community already shows each other. If that standard feels unreasonable or targeted, perhaps that indicates something about your behavior rather than the lease terms." Maxwell looked around, finding no allies among the gathered crowd. Even those who matched his wealth class were nodding in agreement with Benjamin's words. Maxwell's phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at it, his face paling slightly as he read the message. Without another word, he turned and walked away, heading toward his yacht with rapid steps. Benjamin later learned that the message Maxwell received was from Westlake Capital, informing him that after due diligence regarding character considerations, they had decided to allocate their investment to a competing fund. The timing, mere minutes after the public confrontation at the Marina meeting, was no coincidence. Benjamin's seed, planted in his conversation with Thomas Westlake, had borne fruit. As the meeting concluded, Benjamin was approached by an elderly couple who introduced themselves as former owners of a small tour boat business, forced out of the marina 3 years earlier by rising slip fees. "We've been watching the changes here, worried the working side would disappear completely," the woman said. "What you've done, it means everything to folks like us." Similar conversations followed as Benjamin moved through the crowd. Fishermen who had feared displacement, shop owners who had been preparing to sell out, long-time boat owners concerned about the marina's changing character, all expressed variations of the same sentiment. Relief that Crescent Marina would maintain its authentic identity and balanced community. Benjamin's most significant conversation, however, was with Nico Rivera. The elderly fishmonger approached him as the crowd dispersed, extending a weathered hand. "Mr. Reed," he said simply, "thank you for seeing what matters." "I did very little," Benjamin replied honestly. "The community was already here. It just needed protection." Nico smiled. "My father had a saying, 'The right rock in the right place can change the course of a river.' You placed your rock well." He gestured toward the marina. "Will you stay? After all this?" Benjamin hadn't considered this question. His impulse had been to intervene and then retreat to his private life, mission accomplished. But looking around at the marina, at the mixture of working boats and pleasure craft, at the evident relief on people's faces, at the sense of possibility that had replaced resignation, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years, connection to something larger than himself or his career. "I might keep a small boat here," he replied cautiously. "Nothing fancy. Something my grandfather would have approved of." Nico nodded as if this answer made perfect sense. "The water calls to those who listen. Some hear only opportunity for profit or pleasure. Others hear the deeper music, community, tradition, respect for the rhythms that connected generations." He squeezed Benjamin's shoulder. "You hear the deeper music. That is rare these days." By late afternoon, Maxwell Price's yacht had departed Crescent Marina, its wake noticeably gentler than previous passages. Rumor spread that he had secured emergency docking privileges at a more exclusive harbor 20 miles up the coast, one that catered exclusively to luxury vessels and featured no commercial fishing elements. As sunset painted the marina in gold and crimson, Benjamin stood on the main pier watching workers and boat owners preparing for evening. What had begun as an impulsive response to an act of cruelty had evolved into something he hadn't anticipated, a genuine restructuring of power and priorities within a complex community. Money had been the tool, but values had been the blueprint. A text message from his financial manager interrupted his thoughts. Final accounting of the Marina Purchase and Trust Establishment. $72 million acquisition plus $18 million endowment for subsidized leases plus $4.5 million legal and administrative equals $94.5 million total. Approximately 12% of your liquid assets. Are you sure about this? Benjamin typed a simple reply, Best money I've ever spent. Near the harbor master's office, a small crowd had gathered around Nico's stall. The elderly fishmonger was distributing free samples of his grilled catch, a celebration of the day's events. Children ran along the docks with the freedom that comes from being in a place where they are valued rather than tolerated. The atmospheric division between the marina's working and luxury sections seemed somehow less pronounced, as though an invisible barrier had begun to dissolve. Justice, Benjamin reflected, wasn't always about punishment. Sometimes it was about restoration, recreating the conditions in which respect could flourish naturally rather than being enforced through rules or threats. Maxwell Price had experienced consequences for his behavior, certainly. But the true justice lay in the preservation of a community that valued character over currency, connection over status. As darkness settled over Crescent Marina, lights came on across the boats, from the humblest fishing vessel to the most elegant sailing yacht. In that gentle illumination, all were revealed as simply crafts upon the water, their differences of purpose and value secondary to their shared vulnerability to the sea and their common need for safe harbor. It was, Benjamin thought, exactly as his grandfather would have seen it. 6 months passed, bringing seasonal changes to Crescent Marina. Summer tourists gave way to autumn's quieter rhythms. Hurricane season came and went without major incident, though one significant storm tested the marina's infrastructure and community spirit alike. Through changing tides and weather, the new governance structure began to take root, transforming from abstract legal framework to lived reality. Benjamin Reed had indeed purchased a boat, not a luxury yacht as many expected, but a modest 30-foot fishing trawler remarkably similar to his grandfather's vessel. He named it Second Act, and visited the marina whenever his filming schedule permitted, which proved more often than anticipated. He had deliberately scheduled his next 3 projects near enough to allow weekend visits, finding unexpected renewal in the simple routines of boat maintenance and early morning fishing. The marina itself had undergone subtle but significant changes. The once sharp delineation between working and luxury sections had softened. While the physical layout remained largely unchanged, the psychological barriers had begun to dissolve. Wealthy boat owners now occasionally stopped at Nico's stall, discovering the superior quality of truly fresh seafood. Commercial fishermen found themselves invited to social events at the yacht club, their expertise about local waters valued over the social distinctions that had previously excluded them. Nico Rivera, secure in his subsidized long-term lease, had expanded his operations slightly. His grandson Julian, recently graduated from college with a degree in marine biology, had joined the business part-time. Together, they had developed an educational component, weekly sessions for visitors and school children about sustainable fishing practices and marine conservation. These gatherings typically ended with Nico's legendary fish stew, served in compostable bowls to an increasingly diverse crowd of marina users. On a crisp October morning, Benjamin arrived for a weekend stay, parking his unremarkable sedan in the newly designated community lot that had replaced the former premium parking area. As he walked toward his boat carrying supplies, he noticed an unfamiliar vessel docked in the transient slip section. It was substantial but notably smaller than the Maximum Impact had been, perhaps 70 feet compared to the former yacht's 120. The name on the stern read, Perspective. Benjamin paused, supplies still in hand, and studied the boat. It appeared well-maintained but lacked the ostentatious features that had characterized Maxwell Price's former vessel. No exterior LED lighting systems, no excessive chrome, no booming sound system. Just a well-designed, functional yacht with clean lines and understated elegance. Different, isn't it? Eliza Thornton's voice came from behind him. The harbor master approached with her clipboard. Morning inspections in progress. He arrived yesterday. Requested a 3-day transient slip. Maxwell Price? Benjamin asked, though he already knew the answer. Eliza nodded. I almost didn't recognize him. Came alone, handled the boat himself, no crew. Paid the fees without comment, even the environmental impact surcharge for larger vessels that we instituted. Has he caused any problems? Benjamin set down his supplies, giving the conversation his full attention. Quite the opposite. He asked specifically about marina regulations, including noise restrictions and wake limitations. Followed them to the letter when docking. She glanced at Benjamin with a raised eyebrow. Even asked about Nico, whether he was still here, how his business was doing. Benjamin absorbed this information with measured surprise. People can change, I suppose. Sometimes. Eliza agreed cautiously. Though I'm maintaining a weather eye. 6 good hours doesn't erase 6 bad months. Fair enough, Benjamin replied. Let me know if anything develops. He continued to his boat, stowing supplies and preparing for a day on the water. Around mid-morning, as Benjamin was checking his engine, a shadow fell across the deck. He looked up to find Maxwell Price standing on the dock beside the trawler. Maxwell had indeed changed physically. His designer wardrobe had been replaced by simple boating attire, quality pieces but without visible branding. He had lost weight, and his previously perfect tan had faded to a more natural complexion. Most noticeable was his expression. The permanent smirk had vanished, replaced by something more contemplative. "Mr. Reed," Maxwell said with a slight nod. "I thought that might be you. I hope I'm not intruding." Benjamin straightened, wiping his hands on a rag. "Not at all. Just routine maintenance." An awkward silence followed, broken when Maxwell gestured toward the boat. "She's beautiful. A Peterson design." "Good eye," Benjamin acknowledged, genuinely surprised by Maxwell's recognition of the modest vessel's pedigree. "My grandfather had one similar. Not as well preserved as this, but the same honest bones." Maxwell nodded, his gaze moving across the marina. "This place has changed. For the better, I mean. The integration of the different sections, the educational programs. I've been reading about it in the boating magazines." Benjamin remained silent, allowing Maxwell the space to continue. The man was clearly building toward something. "I owe you an apology," Maxwell finally said, meeting Benjamin's eyes directly. "And not just you. Everyone here, especially Mr. Rivera." He glanced down at the dock. "I behaved abominably. Used wealth as a weapon rather than a tool. Treated people as obstacles rather than neighbors." "What changed?" Benjamin asked simply. Maxwell gave a humorless laugh. "Everything. After that day, after you exposed my behavior so publicly, my professional world imploded. Westlake pulled out, of course. Then others followed. My investors began withdrawing funds. Within weeks, my firm had lost 40% of its assets under management." "I'm sorry for your financial difficulties," Benjamin offered, though his tone remained neutral. "Don't be," Maxwell replied with surprising sincerity. "Best thing that ever happened to me. Forced me to confront some uncomfortable truths about who I'd become." He gestured toward his new, smaller yacht. "I downsized everything. House, car, boat. Started a smaller fund with more sustainable investment principles. It's actually performing better with less volatility." Benjamin noticed something he hadn't expected to see in Maxwell Price: authenticity. The performance quality that had characterized their previous interactions was absent. This was not a man playing a role but one speaking his truth, however uncomfortable. "The name of your new boat," Benjamin observed. "Perspective." Maxwell smiled slightly. "Seemed appropriate. I lost a fortunate but gained something more valuable." He paused. "I'm not here to reclaim my old slip or reintegrate into this community. I know trust is earned, not purchased. But I did want to apologize in person, especially to Mr. Rivera. Would you be willing to introduce me? Not as an endorsement, just as a neutral party." Benjamin considered the request carefully. He had no illusion that a single apology could undo the pattern of disrespect Maxwell had established. Yet he also believed in the possibility of genuine change, however rare. After all, wasn't that belief what had motivated his intervention in the first place? "I'll ask if he's willing to meet you," Benjamin offered. "His choice entirely." Later that afternoon, an unusual scene unfolded at Nico's fish stall. Maxwell Price stood before the elderly fishmonger, head slightly bowed, speaking words too quiet for others to hear. Nico listened with the attentive patience that characterized his interactions with everyone, his weathered face revealing neither judgment nor forgiveness. When Maxwell finished speaking, Nico nodded once and extended his hand. They shook briefly, the exchange marked by a simplicity that befit its significance. Benjamin observed this from a distance, recognizing the exchange as private despite occurring in public space. Afterward, Nico approached him at his boat, carrying a small package of fish for Benjamin's dinner. "You witnessed?" Nico asked, handing over the carefully wrapped parcel. Benjamin nodded. Did he apologize properly? He did. Nico gazed out at the water, where afternoon light danced across the surface. He asked if he could buy fish from my stall. I told him all customers welcome if they show respect. Do you think he's changed genuinely? Benjamin couldn't help asking. Nico considered this. The water smooths all stones eventually. Some take longer, some shorter. But the process never stops. He smiled. Much depends on the current they choose to swim in. That evening, a small gathering formed spontaneously on the main dock. Julian Rivera had caught an exceptionally large tuna and Nico had prepared it in his famous style, offering portions to anyone passing by. The resulting impromptu dinner party included an unlikely cross-section of the Marina community: commercial fishermen, recreational sailors, shop owners, maintenance staff, and a few wealthy boat owners who had discovered the simple pleasure of fresh fish expertly prepared. Maxwell Price appeared briefly at the gathering's edge. He accepted a small portion when offered, ate standing slightly apart from the main group, then thanked Julian before departing with a respectful nod to those assembled. He didn't attempt to ingratiate himself or claim more attention than was appropriate for a visitor still earning trust. Progress, Benjamin noted, if not perfection. As sunset painted the marina in amber light, Benjamin found himself beside Eliza Thornton, both watching the community's easy interaction with quiet satisfaction. When I was filming my last movie, Benjamin said, we spent millions creating a fictional community on screen, building sets, hiring extras, manufacturing moments of connection. And here it happens naturally, at the cost of some fish and shared space. Eliza smiled. That's the thing about authentic community. You can't buy it, but you can protect the conditions that allow it to flourish. Like Nico said, placing the right rock to change the river's course. As darkness fell, boat lights reflected on the gentle harbor waters. From the humble workboats to the elegant sailboats to the occasional luxury yacht, each contributed a unique pattern of light to the collective illumination. The diversity created a beauty that uniformity could never achieve, a visual representation of the community's strengthened identity. Benjamin Reed had come to Crescent Marina seeking a simple escape from celebrity life and had stumbled upon an injustice that demanded response. His intervention, using wealth not as a weapon but as a tool for preservation, had altered the trajectory of countless lives, including his own. What began as an impulsive defense of an elderly fishmonger's dignity had evolved into something more profound. The protection of a vanishing way of life that valued character over currency, connection over status, respect over power. As Benjamin prepared to spend the night aboard his modest trawler, he realized that his grandfather would have recognized this truth immediately. The sea may not care about your bank account, but it teaches those who listen that we are all ultimately in the same boat. Different vessels, perhaps, but facing the same horizon, dependent on the same waters, strengthened by mutual respect rather than diminished by artificial hierarchy. The transformation of Crescent Marina wasn't just about ownership structure or lease terms. It was about recalibrating values, ensuring that wealth served character rather than replaced it. In that recalibration, everyone, from Nico Rivera to Maxwell Price to Benjamin himself, had found something essential that money alone could never provide: authentic connection to something larger than individual success. The water smooths all stones eventually. Some take longer, some shorter. But the process never stops.